Hello interwebs, welcome to Adamant IT. This is the Insta360 Link. It's a 4K webcam on a gimbal, so it's basically a drone camera with a USB connection on it. However, it costs £320, which is twice the price of the Logitech Brio webcams that I currently use. So is it worth it, or are you just paying for a gimmick? Let's get into it. So here it is. This guy is smaller than you expect it to be. When I saw pictures of it and even saw other videos of it, I kind of expected it to be a fairly large thing, like, the size of a webcam, but on a gimbal. But it's actually very compact. The entire construction is about the size of a typical webcam, including the gimbal mount and the base and the whole shooting match. So not as big as you think it's going to be. It's fairly tall for its proportions, but all of the weight is in the base here. So even though it's quite tall, it's still just as stable as any other webcam would be. So it's not going to fall off your monitor or anything like that. It has a monitor stand. This bottom bit flips out there, so it can clip over the top of a laptop or a monitor. And this is rubberized, so it doesn't slip as well. And then on the bottom, we've also got a tripod mount there as well. So you can tripod mount this or put it on a mic stand or something like that, which is obviously very useful for creators who are going to be using much more semi-permanent fixtures for these things. Obviously, there's no rotation in any of these mounts, but because it's on a gimbal, it doesn't need that. By definition, you don't need it to be able to turn left and right because the gimbal can do that. This little band around the top of the base here, that is an LED band, so this will light up different colors depending on what it's doing. When the camera is powered up, it will just light up blue, so you can clearly see that the camera is on. And then if it's actually providing a video feed somewhere, it turns green to indicate that you're live, so to speak. Then it can also flash blue colors when it sees gesture inputs. So this thing has sort of AI gesture controls and stuff like that, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. But that band will flash different colors when it sees a gesture, so you know that it's actually seen what you're trying to show it. Then finally on the back, we've got a USB Type-C port as well. And this thing actually came with a USB-C to C cable, which I was very pleased with because with Type-C peripherals, most of the time we might get Type-C on the device, but we're still not using the Type-C ports on our computers because all of our cables are Type-A to Type-C. This one came with a Type-C to Type-C, so you can plug it directly into your Type-C port. If you don't have that, it also comes with a Type-C to Type-A adapter. So big props to Insta360 for including what I think is a very useful cable. The cable was 1.5 meters long, which is only just long enough. I prefer a webcam to have a 2-meter cable because if your computer is on the floor, it's got to reach not just up to your desk, but up to the top of your monitor. So cable wasn't terribly long, but it's Type-C cable. You just buy a longer one. So no problems there. My first concern about this camera is that the Type-C cable that it comes with is USB 2. So I can only assume that the camera itself is USB 2 as well. And that's not a good sign. The Logitech Brio that we're shooting on here and here, these are USB 3 cameras. And that means they've got a whole lot more bandwidth to play with. So they have to do significantly less compression to the image. So this guy being USB 2, that doesn't bode well for me. That makes me very concerned whether it can, no matter how good the camera in there is, if it can only do USB 2, that's going to limit how good the actual video stream is. But let's get to testing and see if it's actually any good. So I've framed both of these cameras up to basically the same shot now, and you can see straight away that the Link is actually destroying the Brio in the most hilarious fashions. It's handling the glare from the hair light that I've put behind myself there. That is not quite, there's a bit of glare there, but it's not blooming like it is on the Logitech. And this is showing better optics. Now, Logitech are really good at optics in their webcams. It's one of the reasons why I've always used them. So seeing another camera that is just clearly has vastly superior optics in it That is very, very telling to me. It's the main reason why I always come back to Logitech is those glass optics. So straight away, the link is showing a better lens overall. Then in addition to that, the overall detail in the picture is just night and day different. If you look at my hair as the hair light reflects in it, you can see that there's a lot more detail there. There's much less sort of compression smearing and stuff like that. And likewise, if I tilt my head slightly, if you look at the frame of my glasses, you can see that there is a lot more detail on the Insta360 link there. Whereas the Logitech, you kind of get just diagonal aliasing and stuff like that. So visually much better. Now the color, I don't think that's quite right on the link. I think I need to just tweak the settings on that to get it correct. That might just be a white balance thing. If I just try dialing that up to 4800K, let's see what that does. We're pushing a bit yellow there. I need to do some more tweaking to get this right. Maybe 4600. Because I run mixed color temperature lights, sometimes setting the color temperature for the camera isn't as simple as just setting it to be the same as the lights you're using, because I actually run a warmer key light because I have fairly cold lighting above me. So I deliberately run slightly warmer key lights because that just throws a bit more warmth into the picture and avoids a fairly sterile look. However, having just tweaked that to 4600, that looks a bit better to my eye now. I'm not an expert, but yeah. The other thing as well is you can see that even despite everything, there's a splash of blue off my t-shirt here. That is very noticeable, but it's not blowing out. And likewise, my lips look a lot more natural on the link. I'm a pale guy anyway, so the pallor of my skin, that's just how I look. And the Brio is a little bit more flattering for that, but that comes at a price of blowing out the reds. My lips always look a bit too red with the Logitech webcams. And you can see that if you look at those switches on the wall behind me, those are very noticeably red. So even though I've got a better look on my lips, we're not losing color at all with the link. It's just better balanced overall. The range on it is just better. So the overall picture quality is very, very impressive, and I like this a lot. We'll have a look at the 4K mode in a moment, just because the Logitech Brio's 4K mode is quite frankly a gimmick. But we'll have a look and see if the Link's 4K mode is actually something that might be worth using. I always shoot in 1080p 60 frames a second. However, 4K can be useful because when you're shooting in 4K, you can, even though you're going to edit and export at 1080p, if you have 4K footage, you can crop in to a section on that footage. This would be particularly useful because it would mean that I could have the link just pointing down at the bench in 4K, and I can just have a 1080p box that I can just move around for what section I want to look at without having to adjust the camera every time. So there are lots of uses for 4K beyond just more detail. So let's have a quick look at the settings apps for these cameras because they differ in a couple of key ways. Now, there's a lot to unpack with the Link, so I'm going to try and go through this quickly. But firstly, if we compare the basic things, the Brio does have a trick up its sleeve in that it does have an adjustable field of view. We can adjust between 65 degrees, 78 is the norm, or 90. Now, it's entirely possible that if we go into 65, it's just digital zooming in or just cropping in. But it does give you that fixed option, and it gives you a kind of a software punch-in, if you like. I usually run at 78 degrees because the 90-degree field of view, it's got its uses if you're in a really narrow room, but you start getting banding around the top edges of the picture, so I try to avoid it. If we go into the image adjustments on these, Logitech Logitune will give you manual focus, manual exposure, gain, white balance, etc. However, they're fairly just arbitrary sliders. Like the exposure is just this -10 to 0 dial, and I don't think that doesn't really have a lot of meaning to me, if I'm honest. And this has always bothered me. Whereas on the Link software, when I go onto manual exposure, we actually have a real ISO and shutter speed setting. which is incredibly good because it means that if you have any knowledge on photography, you can actually have some meaning in these values. If you don't know what the numbers mean, it's pretty simple. You can just go, image gets darker, image gets lighter with the ISO. That's basically your gain, effectively. And the shutter speed is essentially your exposure. Now, because we've got actual numbers here, you can dial in very specific shutter speed values, which allow you to find a shutter speed that will work so you can avoid flickering screens and things like that. We do also have this manual exposure curve, but I'll level with you, I've got no idea what to do with an exposure curve, so I'll leave that alone. We've got auto or manual white balance as well, and both cameras do give access to brightness, contrast, saturation, and sharpness if you want to tweak those. One other thing of note as well is that with the manual focus, which is where, there it is, with focus on the Logitech webcams and most webcams in general, I would always suggest putting them in manual focus because the autofocus is just useless and hunts. In my experience, even with the Brio that's supposed to have a magic autofocus thing because it's got a depth gauge on it, the autofocus it doesn't seem to find what I'm looking for. However, the autofocus on the Link, it actually works. There's no other way of putting it. Just for argument's sake, let's just put both of them into autofocus. And I'll just do a quick test. Here's a random circuit board next to me. I'm going to hold it up to both cameras. And now I'll take it down again. So from that quick test, you can see that the Brio completely missed it. Both of them did hunt to refocus on something closer by. The Link found the board and focused to it. The Brio completely missed it. When I took it down again, both the cameras came back to me reasonably quickly. So the Logitech's ability to focus on a face is fine. However, if you're using it to focus on objects, if you're doing B-roll or like me, you're filming something that's on a desk, the Logitech Brio just cannot autofocus to that. Whereas the autofocus on the Link is actually good enough that I'm actually going to leave it in autofocus mode because it actually works. Both cameras do have a HDR mode. I can't tell the difference when it's on or off. So I'm going to call that a gimmick personally. If I'm wrong, someone correct me. Can't tell the difference. And yes, I have tried it with the camera in streamer and not in streamer mode. For reference, streamer mode seems to disable some of the post-processing on the Link. It drastically reduces the input lag because you'll notice that there is some input lag on the Link, whereas the Brio is a little bit quicker. Streamer mode allows you to put the Link into 60 FPS mode, which is the main reason why you want it turned on. But also, I didn't notice any meaningful difference in quality with streamer mode turned off. So make of that what you will. So let's quickly go through the party pieces of the Link now. So obviously the big thing is we have this gimbal control. We can zoom in, and the zoom is not sure how this looks. I'll have to wait until I get to editing, but it seems to be pretty good. It's got a lot of zoom, and obviously with the gimbal I can pan around, I can look around. And because this is actually on a gimbal, it's not just panning and scanning an image, it's physically turning the camera. There we go, there's the Brio next to it. And I can hit reset and it will just come back to me again. And we can also put in presets. So if I'm going to be, let's just move it over to the right here. If I'm going to have it squared up if I'm working on something at the end of the desk here, we can do that. Let's have a bit of zoom on that as well. So if I'm working on a desktop computer, I might be standing here at the end of the table, and I'll put that in as a preset. Then we'll reset to here, and this is me when I'm just directly in front of the computer here. So now I've got presets. I can go to position 1 down the bench, and I can come back to me in front of the computer. And this software might look a little bit clunky to have open all the time. It's a much bigger window. This preview, even when off, takes up all the space. But you can put it into this hotbar mode, and it goes down to the bottom of the screen, and everything is accessible from here. I've got my presets down there, so those are just quickly accessible. I've got my zoom and my gimbal controls, autofocus and manual focus, and I can even just go to the settings, and it will just pop out all of the image settings here. So this is incredibly good. It's useful, it doesn't clash with OBS, and it's not in my way. By comparison, Logitune, this is not a real window. It doesn't appear in the start bar. So I can never find this when I'm looking for it. So now let's talk about the gestures that the Link has. So there's three main gestures that you can use with this. And the first and the most useful one is the AI auto tracking feature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold up my palm, and the LED bar on the camera will blink. And once it does that, that tells me that it's seen my gesture. And now it'll follow me around. It'll just automatically track my face and use the gimbal to track me wherever I go. And this is adjustable. At the moment, it's zooming in to keep half of my body in shot. And if I change that to head, I can have this punch in and try and keep my head in shot. So this gives us this profile look. And this is how I would normally do the face cam, so to speak. And even if I come all the way back here, it's just going to keep zooming in as much as it can to keep my head in the shot. And if I come all the way up here again, it does a pretty decent job of tracking me without being violent about it. And you can increase or decrease the tracking speed. So if you need it to be really strict, I can change that tracking speed to fast, and it'll be a lot more aggressive with it. So if I come back here again, wait for it to find me, and then just advance. It's very slight. The difference between fast and slow is a long distance, but normal seems about right. At any rate, that's there if you want it. And if you wanted to track without doing the zooming, you can just switch off the zoom. And now it will track me, but it won't adjust the zoom. So if you want to do any zooming in post, or you don't want to use the zoom because it might compromise the picture quality, you can say, don't ever zoom, just track me. So that is really nice to be able to have that on or off. So, and once again, once I'm done with this, I can just hold up my palm again. The bar blinks, and now it's no longer tracking me, and I can move back and forth. So you can have it follow you to a point and then say, okay, now stay here while I move around in frame. On a similar note, it also comes with some little stickers that you can put on a whiteboard or a flip chart next to you, and you can you can throw up the peace sign, and it will go into whiteboard mode where it will lock onto the whiteboard and just stay there. So if you're actually doing a presentation for more like conference stuff, or again, if you're a content creator and you're going to explain something with a whiteboard demonstration, you can tell it to lock onto the whiteboard for that section. And then the other gesture we have is the zoom control, which is you throw up the L, and once again, it'll flash when it sees it, and you can move your arm up or down to zoom in and out. I find the zoom setting to be extremely janky, though, quite frankly. I don't think it's useful at all. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. I thought it was really jank. However, the palm for auto tracking, that one is really good. It takes a couple of seconds to find it, but you get that visual blink from the camera when it has found you. And once again, and off. There we go. And once you get the hang of that, that's pretty straightforward to do, and that's not too intrusive. If I was editing a video for YouTube, I can easily just jump cut to cut out me doing signals to the camera. That wouldn't be difficult to do. Or failing that, if you're doing a live show, that's not too intrusive because you could probably do that as well. And most people might not even notice that you're doing a gesture to the camera. It looks kind of weird, I guess, but I don't know. It's up to you whether that's weird or not. And stop. So those are the gesture settings. And at first I was a bit concerned of, it's just picked up that hand signal. That's one of the disadvantages. On a couple of occasions, I gesticulate a lot. And on a couple of occasions, I've had it just pick up random hand movement as a gesture. So that can happen, but I don't know. Anyway, one of the things that was concerning me is having to have the software open for this, or integration with other programs. In the settings for this, you can go to hotkey and you can assign keyboard shortcuts for all of these things. And that is useful for two things. Is that A, you've got your keyboard shortcuts or whatever, But also, because there are keyboard shortcuts, this means that you can now assign it to something like an Elgato Stream Deck or any other kind of custom hardware you have. So you could dial in presets, and I could have a hotkey on my keyboard and just say, point down go to position 1, start tracking me, stop tracking me. Even just gimbal controls. You could have it on a joystick if you wanted. Zoom in, zoom out, all the rest of it. And also multiple devices. It looks like it might actually support having multiple of these cameras connected as well, which is great. So I like all of this. The software really is amazing. So here's the 4K comparison. Right now, this is the Logitech Brio in 4K mode. We have to drop down to 30 frames a second for this, so we've lost the smooth 60 FPS motion. I haven't used this thing in 4K for a long time, actually, so I'm just going to waffle for a short amount of time, and then we'll go to the editing desk in a moment after I've been able to review this footage, and I can comment on whether it actually looks good or not. So yeah, this is the Brio in 4K mode. Now here's the Insta360 Link in 4K mode. Again, 30 frames a second only for this one. It can't do 60 FPS in 4K. I'd be amazed if it could. And once again, I can't see from my preview whether this is any good or not, because the small preview window I have when recording isn't big enough to tell if 4K has actually got more detail in it or not. But yeah, here it is. So having waffled for another 30 seconds, let's go to the editor's desk where I'll show you the comparison and whatever. Okay, so when I originally did the review of the Logitech Brio, my recording rig wasn't really capable of doing 4K. And now I'm looking at it on a rig that can do half decent 4K recording. It's not half bad. If I punch in on the background to where I've got this hat tactically placed on top of a monitor, you can see there's actually significantly more information in 4K mode. Now obviously that should go without saying, but it proves that the 4K mode on the Brio is actually not a gimmick, and it's a lot better than I previously gave it credit for. If you don't need 60 FPS, then you really want to consider running your Brio in 4K if you've got the horsepower to do it. The Insta360 Link achieves a very, very slight depth of field on background stuff, and that puts the hat slightly out of focus. So I'm going to go back to looking at my hair on this one to see if there's any more detail to find in there. And yeah, if we punch in on my face here, you can see that we've got almost the comparison of the Brio versus the Link all over again, with the Link in 1080p versus 4K. So once again, 4K is not a gimmick on these cameras. If you don't need 60 FPS, it's worth it. It really is. I'm actually really impressed by how good that looks for just a webcam. Now for the 4K side by side here. Although the Brio took a significant step up into 4K mode, it still gets demolished by the Link. Again, you can see it in the quality of the hair. So both cameras put up a really good fight here. I am actually quite impressed by how well the Brio pulled back some ground, but the Link is still superior. The big utility about having your camera on a gimbal is that now you have one camera that can do multiple camera angles for you. So right now I've got the camera just overhanging the desk pointing at my face, and if I want to show something that's on the desk now, what I can do is go to overhead mode. So I'll click this button here, and the camera will automatically look down and flip the image. So now it's looking down, and I can showcase stuff on the bench, and I can do a repair like I would in a usual video. And then when I want to go back to talking head, I'll switch off of overhead mode, and it's automatically just come back to my face again. So this is really useful for doing multiple things with a single camera. And I didn't need to touch the camera or change the mount at all. Obviously, if I've got a camera on a tripod, I can just rearrange the camera to change shot. But that's very slow to keep doing that back and forth. Whereas this, I have it on one touch. I could even have it on a shortcut key. And if this is something that you're going to rarely do, or you don't have the tripod set up, or, you know, like one of the problem I've got at the moment is the camera is out floating above my desk. It's in the way of the monitors and stuff like this. So this isn't practical for an office environment. It's more useful for my situation. But there's one more party piece that this camera can do to solve that problem. So now I've got the camera sitting on top of my monitor, which is where it would be in a normal sort of webcam position. And so, as you can see, it's giving me a great view of me. And my monitors are quite far away from me because it's a very deep desk. But because we've got the auto tracking and zoom controls, this is just a non-issue. A lot of the time, having your webcam mounted on top of your monitor isn't actually a very good place for it because you can never get it at quite the right angle or anything like that. But with this gimbal mount now, it doesn't matter where I put the webcam, it can turn and find me. But if I have it directly in front and overhead like this, I can use what's called desk view mode. So I'll click on this. And what the camera has done now is it's looking down at the desk in front of me. So like if I go directly down, you can see it just looks at itself. It's looking at the top of the monitor. But in desk view mode, it's now looking at the desk in front of me. And from this camera angle, you might think, well, how's it doing that? That looks like it's directly overhead. But what it's doing is it's doing a massive keystone correction. If I bring in a box here, when I point this box at the camera, you can see the enormous keystone correction it's doing in order to pull off this camera angle. Now, if you're I think they kind of, their idea is that it's the people that do unboxing videos can use this. No. If you're a content creator, you're not doing this because that massive keystone correction is horrendous. Also, it's very easy to come off shot. Like, I'm nowhere near off shot physically, but because of the camera angle, the box is now just completely out of view. So I have to hold things quite far forward in order for the camera to actually see it. But what this is good for is that, you know, if you're doing a video conference, you can have someone just look at something that's on your desk. You can say, look, here's this prototype widget that we're working on. Here's the real prototype. You can see how big it is and stuff like that. And you could even do some handwritten notes on the desk and just draw a stick figure diagram of what you want to show to someone. And then when you're done with that, you turn it off and we're back to the face cam again. So this isn't something that's useful to me. However, I think that's a really neat party trick. And if you're looking at this webcam as a very, very high-end webcam, then it's very good for that. The only problem is that unless I'm mistaken, the webcam does need to be straight on for that to be useful. But also, if you're using this as a conferencing webcam, that's how you'd have it set up. For me, when I'm streaming or doing content creation, I like to have my webcam off at a 3/4 view. I think streamers who have their webcam facing head on, I think it's a bit uncanny valley to have them just staring out of the screen all the time. So I like to have my one at a slight 3/4 angle so it looks like I'm looking at what you guys are seeing. So yeah. But at any rate, that's the desk view mode. One more test I've got to quickly do with this camera is the obligatory microphone check. If you're using this as an actual microphone, then this will be of interest to you. If you're a creator or if you're buying equipment of this expense, in my opinion, you should also have a dedicated microphone. A USB condenser microphone on some kind of boom arm will always destroy any webcam's built-in mics. However, just for funsies, let's just do a quick comparison. So here's the audio directly out of the Insta360 link. I've not got any filters applied to this at all. It's just raw audio. And based on my testing, it's not bad, all things considered. Obviously, it's not as good as a studio condenser. That's an impossible comparison to make. But as just an actual, as a webcam mic for use as, I'm in a bigger room here. If you're in a smaller room, it's going to sound better. It's not terrible, quite frankly. I think it's usable. You would obviously need to be using headphones because if you've got speakers on, it's going to pick up speaker noise and stuff like that, which is the other advantage of the condenser. You can filter out background noise better with that. But all things considered, it's not awful. If you're a creator, you shouldn't be using your webcam's built-in mic. However, if you're doing it for conference calls, it's not terrible. So I think we've gone over all of the feature sets of this camera now. All that remains is obviously just the question of the price of it. At £320, it's a lot of money for what is essentially a glorified webcam. There are a couple of things that we need to consider when talking about the price. Is what else is available, at what price, and what value proposition does that show? Well, the Logitech Brio that I've been comparing against, that retails for about £150 these days. And as a general creator webcam that I use for looking down at a desk and stuff like that, I still think it's a very powerful option. Both Logitech and Corsair or Elgato have streamer webcams that are specifically designed for people who do Twitch streams and things like that. Those will almost certainly be a better option if you're a streamer. Actually, I bought an Elgato Stream Cam because I nearly re-recorded this entire review as the Insta360 Link versus the Elgato. However, the Elgato was actually so bad that it angered me and I just sent it straight back. It's that bad. It's well priced, it's very cheap, but it's not a good webcam. It is not a studio quality cam in the slightest. The Brio destroys it, so make of that what you will. What the quality of those is, I don't know. I am very interested in taking a look at some of these streamer cameras to find out if they're actually any good or not as well. Mainly just as, face cams as such. Because if you want better quality than what a webcam can do, you have to set up a mirrorless camera or an SLR camera with a HDMI capture card. And that's a great deal more equipment, both in just the size and cost of the camera, as well as having the rig to support it as well. And £320 for a webcam sounds like a lot, but picking up even a second-hand SLR, making sure you've got a lens for it, and having a spare HDMI capture card for it, that's not going to be any cheaper. That ultimately will give you a better picture, but again, when you factor in everything else, £320 for something that fits in the palm of your hand and can do something that is still a very good quality picture is suddenly a compelling price point. So what can this do that those ones can't? Well, the gimbal is what you're paying for at that point. None of these other cameras have a gimbal. In fact, the only other camera I know of that has a magic gimbal mount like this one would be the OBS bot camera. And that one is only 2-axis. And in my opinion, that makes it not worthwhile. The best price I could find on it was about £270. It originally retailed at $320. So it's the same kind of price point as this. But with only having 2 axes of rotation on it, that suddenly means that it can't auto-level the same way that this one can. And that really, really limits its usefulness. Sure, you've got pan and tilt on it, but the fact that this one can pan, tilt, and rotate means that whatever angle I put this to, it will find the level. When I'm setting up the Logitech webcam to look down on the bench, I have to spend a good sort of 10 to 30 seconds meticulously making sure it's straight and that the bubble level is straight and stuff like that. Whereas anytime I've been testing with this camera and I've wanted to set it up on the tripod, I don't have to level it at all. I just put it to the correct height I want it at and the correct distance, and it just automatically finds true level. And that's really useful to me because it means I can keep moving the camera around for a different angle and just always know that it's going to be level and not on the piss. Because sometimes you won't realize that until you get to editing. It'll look fine in the preview, but then you get to editing and you're like, I don't know what part of me thought the camera was straight for this, So that is incredibly useful. And if you want something that's the equivalent of this, as I say, the OBS bot is only 2 axes and is just as expensive, then old style webcams that had pan and tilt and stuff like that, they're old, slow, nowhere near the kind of quality that this will give. I guess you could get a handheld gimbal that doubles as a tripod and put a mobile phone in it and use a mobile phone as a webcam. That would give you something comparable to this that would be also fairly compact and give you a great quality video stream. But then the problem with that is you now need to factor in that you've got the cost of the phone and the cost of the gimbal. And the gimbal is going to cost you £100, and the phone is going to be, what, 200, 300 for a smartphone with a half-decent camera on it? I guess you could use your existing phone that you own, but using your own phone as a camera is a pain in the ass because now you don't have access to your phone while you're filming. So that means that you basically have to assign a dedicated phone for it, and suddenly you're paying for that now. So £320 sounds like a lot of money for a webcam, and it is. But when you actually factor in what it would cost to get something that can do the same as what the Insta360 link can do, suddenly the price tag is actually about right, I think. It's up to you whether you can afford that or not, or it's up to you whether these features are useful to you or not. However, now you know what the camera is capable of, so if you think it looks interesting, now you know what to expect from it. I want to give a big shout out to Colin from my community who actually bought this camera for me. I've mentioned it a couple of times in podcasts and elsewhere, saying I thought it looked interesting and I wanted to look at one, and he turned around and said, "I'll buy one for you." So massive thank you to Colin for supplying this camera for me to use. This is going to probably be the new bench cam. I'd love to use it as the face cam, and I might do in certain shots, but the fact that it gives that really powerful top-down view and always finds perfectly level shots, that is going to be something that is incredibly useful to me. So thank you to Colin, and also thank you to everyone else who supports the channel, my Patreon, channel members, Twitch subscribers, and everyone who just views as well. Thanks everyone for watching and tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.